economy, how we function, the climate crisis, and how we really are honest with ourselves about the challenges. First, I want to give you, because of the focus on trade and the economy, I brought my copy of the federal budget. I don't know why I bring these things around. But the assessment by our Finance Canada officials is that we're in a pretty good position. Our debt to GDP ratio is one of the strongest in the G7. We've had relatively improved economic growth in the last number of years. It was sluggish for a long time. We're going into another sluggish cycle. But overall, we're a wealthy country with great resources and a tremendously well-educated, resourceful, and I have to say, extraordinary population. I've gone to, well, if we count it today in Surrey as part of our Community Matters Tour, I'm glad it is a town hall, but this would be the 23rd community in which open the floor to questions, ask people to ask me anything about where we stand as a party. And what I can tell you about traveling Canada from the Maritimes, Quebec, Ontario, BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and towns big and small, we are, as Canadians, so united in the things that we care about. I don't get different questions in Calgary than I get in Prince George, than I get in Charlottetown. People are concerned about the same questions of how do we, as Canadians, protect those things that are most dear to us. And what is often most dear is local, it's community, and it's the work that you work on here with the Surrey Board of Trade. I take those issues very seriously, and as the party that may surprise you to know that sometimes when I hear Preston Manning speak, I wonder if he's picked up the Green Party platform, because he will say we have to live within our means economically and ecologically. As a matter of fact, I did at one point go to Preston and say, it's really time you join the Green Party. What are you doing? Because you want us to live within our means ecologically, and we're the only party that understands that. But we also want to live within our means on an economic basis, which means if you're running short-term deficits, you have to know they're short-term, and you have to be planning for the future. We're looking, and we will be producing, as we always do, connected with our platform, a fully costed budget. We're the only party that does this. We've put forward a budget with our platform that runs out 3 years. And we're the only party that ever submitted our budget to the Parliamentary Budget Office to have them review it to tell us if it's fiscally sound or if they would find trouble with it if we were government and the PBO had to review our budget. We will be, and by the way, when they reviewed our budget, they said this is fiscally sound and this all makes sense, and you know where you're getting your money and it all balances out. In the 2019 election, we will also be submitting our full budget to the Parliamentary Budget Office, which recently had a change in its legislative mandate to actually allow them to review party platform budgets. They did it for me in 2011, and then in 2015 they said, oh, we're not sure we can do this, and then so this year they've had a change in their legislative mandate. So any party can submit their budget to the Parliamentary Budget Office to have an assessment. I'm hoping other parties will do so. So far, we're the only party that is committed to ensuring that what we take to Canadians can actually work through a third-party, independent, professional assessment. So we look at what's happening in Canada's economy, and I want to stress right off the top that we would love to be known as the party for small business. We continually stress that small business in Canada is the country's largest employer. We also I have a private member's bill currently before Parliament. It's Bill 258. It isn't going to get through before the election, but the short title of the bill is Think Small First. And my bill, if passed, would require that every time there's a change in federal legislation or federal regulations, the bill would have to go through an advance evaluation, just as we do environmental assessment for the impacts on the environment. This bill would require an advance review to see what are the potentially unanticipated knock-on effects for small business. Because small business across Canada doesn't have anything like the lobbying voice of, dare I say it, SNC-Lavalin. Small business across Canada has to try to get the attention of government, and often after changes have been made, which are detrimental to small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises that are basically just growing, keeping their head above water in some cases, and when an unanticipated change hurts their bottom line, it can have a really detrimental impact that often no one saw coming. So we are committed to that. We look at Canada's economy and say, well, where is our GDP? We hear so much about the oil sands. You know that at the height of oil sands activity, when oil was selling for more than $100 a barrel, at its height, the GDP contribution of the oil sands never reached 3%. In other words, at the height of oil sands activity, it was never as large a contributor to our economy as tourism. But again, the voices of tourism are spread across the country, generally in small businesses, but employing many more people than fossil fuels, mining, and forestry combined. So we look at where the jobs are, where workers are, where communities are. We try to design an economic strategy that works locally, but we also have to make sure our economic strategy works globally. And that's where I want to spend at least a little time this morning before we open the floor to questions and answers. And I know I have only 10 minutes, which means in total I've got 2 minutes left. So turning to the climate crisis, I'm sure a lot of you noticed yesterday the reports that Canada's climate is warming twice as fast as the global average. That's not a surprise. I worked in Environment Canada in the 1980s. We knew that then. We knew that Canada was more vulnerable because the impacts of a warming climate globally would be felt more acutely in those countries closer to the poles. In other words, equatorial changes would be not as dramatic as changes at the polar extremes. Canada's climate has changed already. Humanity has changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, and we can't go back. Up until fairly recently, the highest level of carbon dioxide concentrations in our atmosphere over a period of 1 million years had never gone above 280 parts per million. Now, parts per million is a vanishingly small amount. 280 parts per million doesn't sound like it could amount to anything. But that was the beneficial greenhouse effect that trapped enough of the sun's radiated heat near the Earth's surface to make this planet hospitable for life. If it wasn't for the natural greenhouse effect, this planet would be too cold to sustain life at all. We'd be yet another rock orbiting around the sun with no life. But the beneficial greenhouse effect, kind of the sweet spot, was 280 parts per million. It went below that. But in a period of over 1 million years, it never went above that. I'm going to digress just to justify what I just said. People sometimes think, well, 500 years ago, no one could measure the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, so how does she say it's been over 1 million years that it was never above 280? And that's because of fantastic modern science that takes Antarctic ice cores, and ice never freezes completely solid, so we have air bubbles in all the ice cores, and you can actually, it's like a time capsule to the atmosphere going back 1 million years. That's how we know, as a fact, that it's never been above 280 parts per million. Well, it's now over 410 parts per million. We are the first Homo sapiens in the history of our species to breathe air with more than 400 parts per million CO2. That warming has thrown our planet into an emergency situation where just about everything is changing. Temperatures of our oceans, acidification of the oceans, lack of oxygen in the oceans, increased drought, increased heat waves, increased floods, decreased Arctic ice, and the knock-on effects from all of those things threaten our survival on the planet. Which is why, when scientists warn us, you have to act now, politicians who claim to care about climate think it's enough to say, oh, we're doing a few things, look at us, we get it. And politicians who are irresponsible say, those weak things that have been done now, we'll cut them all. What we need is a grown-up conversation in this country about how we stop relying on fossil fuels completely, how we do it, how we budget for it, how we plan for it, and how we benefit as a country from renewable energy, which right now BC Hydro, we all know this, BC Hydro, our lights are on 100% renewable. Plug in our cars into our EV chargers, it's 100% renewable, but we could do way better. We could have solar panels on the roofs of every public building, on the roof of every home. We could generate more energy from our buildings than the buildings require to function. Then that gets really cool. Then you're plugging your car into your house and you're driving based on the solar power that you collected yourself. It's better for the economy, It employs millions of people, believe me, just to attack the waste of energy in our buildings, to make them energy efficient and then energy producers, and move to restoring the areas that have been damaged by fossil fuel development, move to, while we continue to use fossil fuels, only using Canadian oil, so we're not fighting over export pipelines, but using what's produced here and stopping imports from other countries. We can create far more jobs in Canada. But the reality is, even if we couldn't, we have to do it. Because otherwise our kids don't survive. So I don't think it's a choice. I wonder why it is that people think there's any debate. So I want to open the floor to all of your cares and concerns. I really appreciate the chance to have this with the Surrey Board of Trade, a chance to talk about what the Green Party wants to do in Parliament when we have more members of Parliament, and work directly for the people who elect us. I should mention, that's one other thing about the Green Party. We will never win votes, our MPs, and when there was another MP there with me, we don't believe in the idea that smart people get elected to Parliament and then have to check their brains at the door and do what they're told. We believe that members of Parliament work for the communities that elect them. So with that, open to questions, and thank you again for your time.